All right, so Senator, you're in a little bit of a feud right now with the president of Mexico. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, we were actually honestly working on this remittance reform. So the House we don't like right now, if you're an illegal immigrant and you send money back to Mexico, there's no tax on that, right? So in the House version, they put a 3.5% tax on that. We were already working to double that, like on the Senate side, as that's come over here. I've filed that bill. That's an issue that's important to me. I think it does a couple things we can talk about, like discourage illegal immigration and fairness, because a lot of these folks are being paid under the table, and they ought to, like Americans pay taxes, they should pay taxes too. And then the president of Mexico issues this threat that if this remittance tax goes in, we're going to rise up. It was very strange. And so I went on X and said, well, that's interesting. How about 15% now? And then the president of the Mexican Senate talked about it yesterday. And I said, well, how about 20%? So let's just keep going with this. But it is interesting. It's like 4% of their GDP is from this remittance that comes from the United States. And my position is, the United States of America is not your piggy bank, right? Like, we're a sovereign country, and you ought to be taxed on these remittances. So I'm hopeful that we'll get that number up from the House bill on the Senate side.
And look, we are a sovereign country, and if you want to send money home, just principally, we're not necessarily against that. What this is about, though, is that this has become a primary subsidy as to why mass migration is happening. It's a forcing function, right? And so let's just be very clear. If you come here, legally from Vietnam, you want to send money, that's not the problem. The problem is that therefore the Mexican government is financially incentivized to keep the invasion going. That's why remittances are so important. We're not trying to be cruel or unusual. It's that the Mexican government has turned a blind eye for quite some time, and it's literally tens of billions of dollars. Okay, I want to play two pieces of tape here. First is 252. I don't know who she thinks she is or what cards she thinks she's holding, or she's saying that she'll unleash the cartels against us. That's the only card she really has. Play cut 252.
If needed, we will definitely mobilize, because we absolutely cannot accept any new taxes on remittances sent by our hardworking folks in the U.S. to their families back home in Mexico.
Okay, what does she mean by mobilize, Senator?
I don't know.
Sort of strange.
I don't know, but you don't have to probably guess, go too far out on a limb. The truth is that this mass migration that we've seen that needs to be met with mass deportations is fueled by this international NGO network that, the insult to injury, American taxpayers were subsidizing through USAID in many instances, right? But they know exactly what they're sending a signal. She's sending a signal that in the United States, it should be no coincidence this happened around the time that the LA riots were starting, that somehow this is it's a threat. I don't know exactly what it means, but we're going to mobilize. I don't know what that means, but she shouldn't be doing it, and we don't take threats kindly in this country. I know I don't, and that's why I think that this issue, which was important anyway, I think becomes even more front and center because of her comments.
Let's play here. This is now the president of the Mexican Senate. I think he's mocking you. This is in Spanish, but with subtitles. So basically for the radio audience and the podcast audience that doesn't speak Spanish, he's mocking you, but it's worth playing. Let's play cut 449.
Está el tema del impuesto a las remesas, que ya un senador estadounidense ahora dice que le van a poner 15. Ay, estás viendo y no ves, senador, ¿no? ¿Cómo se llama el senador? Quieren apagar el fuego con gasolina. La compañera presidenta ha insistido que es el diálogo, el respeto.
Okay, so at the end he's saying...
Did you just call me El Diablo? Did I hear that?
Yeah, something
was I referred to as the devil?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was dialogue, actually. I think that was the word. I don't think he was quite calling you Diablo. But the part that was important is en fuego on gasoline. So, these are kind of it's very interesting. I want everyone to remember this. Now, I want to introduce a third data point. So we have the president of Mexico, Steinbaum. We have this president of the U.S., the Mexican Senate. And do you remember under Joe Biden, the Obrador? Do you remember that he also similarly threatened? He was like, if you don't give us our aid money, you're not going to like what happens. And that was like a lesser covered story. It just kind of went away. And Biden just kind of like flooded in a ton of capital to Mexico. So, Senator, I don't want to speculate too much, but are they threatening the United States of America?
It sure seems that way. And I don't know exactly what they mean by mobilize or, throwing, fuel on the fire. I mean, if you put it in the context of the time in which they're making these comments, you have an American city burning with people waving Mexican flags, right? Like maybe it's a signal that's being sent, which again is, I think, why President Trump's leadership is so important to get the National Guard there to help to end this thing. But I think that, Charlie, what's happening right now, and maybe it's also part of their comments, for a long time, really since the Cold War ended, there were decisions that were made. A lot of our leadership, Republican and Democrat, sort of ceded a lot of important aspects of whether it's related to trade, how we, engage in foreign conflicts and sending, our boys off to fight in foreign wars. There's been this sort of globalist end of history kind of moment where people thought that everybody, that everybody was going to be some democracy, and we had this wandering foreign policy, and our money went to ridiculous things that ended up being like LGBTQIA plus Sesame Street in Iraq. Like that's what was exposed with all this Doge stuff. But it also is a mentality that somehow people in other countries are entitled to our money. And that's not the case. We can make those decisions only if it furthers the interests of the United
100%.
States of America.
Exactly.
But you don't just get it. We're not the piggy bank. We're not like, we're not the patron for all of these ridiculous causes. And we certainly shouldn't be to funnel an effort to, bring 15 million people here illegally, which is exactly what we saw over the last 4 years. So I think this is tied together, sort of globalist mindset, mass migration. It's all part of it. And they're mad that the United States is maybe changing direction here.
Senator, big, beautiful bill. What's going on here? Some of your colleagues are putting up a real fight on behalf of fiscal conservatism. Where are the negotiations? After these riots and after this bedlam, it is mandatory that we pass the big, beautiful bill. It is mission critical.
I agree. I think that I agree. I think that the border provisions, the immigration law enforcement aspect of it is more important than ever. It's on full display as to why when you see what's happening right now, when you literally have people who are trying to prevent ICE from enforcing immigration law and deport people, which is exactly what President Trump ran on. So we need more detention facilities. We need more ICE agents. We need more enforcement efforts. We need more deportations, right? And so the bill does go a long way. And I think that everybody's very supportive of that. And I think the reasons why are highlighted on the television screen every night now. And I think as it made its way to the Senate, the House did great work on this. And I think the Senate, we have a lunch today to talk about it. I'm actually going to be visiting with President Trump later today to talk about some of the provisions. I think the Senate wants to make sure if we can find more savings, we want to go do that. And I think that will make the big, beautiful bill even more beautiful. But I will say that I think everybody's united that at the end of the day, we get this thing done. It's got a lot of President Trump's priorities. They're very, very popular with the American people and the things that he ran on. So I'm still very optimistic. I think we're aiming for the 4th of July on the Senate side, and then that would give a couple of weeks that, to get this thing ultimately done before August.
And so, Senator, part of the provisions as far as cost savings, I know that there is some fear that we're not going to be able to send it back to the U.S. House to be able to get those through. But there's so much good stuff that we hope stays. No tax on tips, major border security, increase in ICE agents. So what are the elements then you think that will be emphasized or focused on between your colleagues to find those cost savings?
Well, there's just nobody in the Senate that really likes what was done with SALT. And you look at what's happening in California, the subsidizing the terrible policy decisions of blue state governors. There's just not support for that in the Senate. Having said that, we understand the dance that Mike Johnson has to do to get the votes over in the House. That's a very practical consideration. So we're very well aware of that. But you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. Again, to subsidize terrible decisions in New York and California and Illinois, my neighbor, J.B. Pritzker, right? So there's definitely a conversation about that, what we can do to find savings there. We just talked about the remittance tax. That would add billions, bringing more revenue in by taxing remittances from illegal immigrants here as they send the money elsewhere. So there's some other things to do. But that's where we're at right now in the Senate. I think that we're trying to figure out a place where we can maximize the savings, but also deliver on President Trump's promises. And I'm very optimistic that we're going to get there.
And we have to unlock growth, right? We got to get to a 3 to 4% growth calculus. We have to, which is about drill, baby, drill, lower tax rates. I think there's some pent up investment demand that is just willing to be unleashed in our country right now. And you have the artificial intelligence. You have a blue collar boom that is really waiting to happen. And so, kind of final question, Senator, are you bullish that this is all going to work out?
I am. And you got to remember the reconciliation thing. It's a big thing. The big, beautiful bill is a big thing, but it's one piece to all of this too, right? We have rescissions packages to codify the DOJ reforms. That'll be important. We have the normal appropriations process, which is for discretionary spending, the reconciliations for the mandatory spending. And then you also have what I think President Trump's about to do, which is to finally rebalance trade so we stop getting ripped off around the world. You talked about that demand that's out there. I think once we get fairer deals with these countries that have been ripping us off, I think you're going to see a lot of economic growth from that too. So you put all of those things together, and if we actually get all that stuff done this year, which I'm confident that we will, you're going to see, again, I think this golden age of America that President Trump's talked about, and enough runway for that to happen before 2028.
Thank you so much, Senator Schmidt. Keep it up. Good luck tonight, and go Cubs.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlie.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.